Good good morning. I'm Dan Wathen. I chair the commission to investigate the facts of the Lewiston tragedy. And we've convened the commission this morning for the purpose of hearing and interviewing Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Vazquez. I'll begin by explaining that we're doing this as a webinar setup uh, to permit the public to view it as it proceeds live. And it'll be recorded and placed on our website as well for later viewing. And I will point out once again that we are having ASL interpreters uh, throughout the proceeding. And I will begin by asking the members of the commission to to introduce themselves, starting off with Ms. Gorman.
Good morning. My name's Ellen Gorman. I'm a former member of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court.
Good morning. I'm Paula Silsby. I'm a former federal prosecutor.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Deborah Bader. I'm a retired forensic psychologist.
Good morning. I'm Jeffrey Rushlow. I'm a former district attorney and a retired district court judge.
Good morning. My name is Toby Dilworth. I'm a former assistant U.S. attorney, and I currently practice law in Portland.
And now to the staff.
Good morning. My name is Ann Jordan. I'm the executive director of the commission.
Good morning. I'm Brian McMaster, retired chief of investigations for the Maine Attorney General and one of the investigators for the commission.
Good morning. I'm Jim Osterreiter. I'm a retired FBI agent.
Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Vazquez, I guess I have you somewhere on my screen. If you could raise your right hand and I will render an oath to you. Do you swear that the testimony you will give in the matter now in hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And begin perhaps by just introducing yourself and telling us a bit about your background.
My name's Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Vazquez. I'm the commander of the 3rd of the 304th in Saco, Maine. I've been the commander for approximately 1 year. Prior to that, I was a commander at a unit at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, an intelligence unit. I'm an intelligence officer, counterintelligence special agent by trade within the Army. I've been in the Army approximately 30 years. 5 enlisted, 25 as an officer. I live outside of Boston.
And beginning this morning, Mr. Rushlaw will lead off with some questions, and Mr. Dilworth will follow up, and then others as we come to that. So, Mr. Rushlaw.
Thank you. Good morning, Lieutenant Colonel. And I should point out that my dad was a career Air Force officer, so I'm keenly aware of ranks and where people belong on the chain of command. So I'll try to remember that with precision as we go through this. You've already explained some of what I'm going to ask you about initially, which is that you are the battalion commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 304th Regiment. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And that regiment is part of the 104th Training Division?
Yes, sir.
Who is the regimental commander now?
Of the 104th, sir?
Yes. No, the 304th.
Oh, I am, sir. I've been in the position since about a year ago. Late June last year, I had a change of command.
All right. I think I'm confusing myself because you're the commander, I thought, of the 3rd Battalion. Is that right?
3rd of the 304th, yes, sir.
And the 304th is something designated as a regiment?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But is there a regiment?
No, it's very confusing how they do the lineage. Essentially, I belong to a brigade. That's my hire. And then from the brigade, it goes up to the 104th Division, sir.
What is the brigade called?
It's called 2nd Brigade of the 104th Division, sir.
All right. And this, I'm going to try to avoid jumping around too much, but this allows me to jump ahead. Does the brigade have a brigade surgeon?
No, we do not.
Because some of the documents we've looked at have talked about trying to involve the brigade surgeon in Robert Card's aftercare. So you do not have a brigade surgeon.
No, we don't.
All right. So you said earlier that you were enlisted personnel for 5 years, and then you've been an officer for 25 years?
About that, sir, yeah. Active duty 5 years, and then a couple years as enlisted, and I commissioned after I went into the reserve, sir.
All right. And again, how much of this is active duty and how much has been in the Army Reserves?
Five active, Army Reserve 25.
All right. And before taking command of the 3rd of the 304th, you were a commander of a unit at Fort Devens?
Yes, sir.
What was that unit?
It was called Detachment 1, United States Central Command. It's an intelligence unit that does intelligence support to U.S. Central Command out of Tampa.
And would that be in size analogous to a battalion, or more like a company, or somewhere in between?
It's in between. It's in between. It's actually that I was filling in for a full bird colonel. He got another assignment. I was supposed to be the temporary commander for 3 months, and it ended up being 15. They couldn't find a replacement. It's a highly technical unit with a lot of senior officers in it.
I see. Was that the first time you had been a commander of a unit?
No, sir.
What other command positions had you had in units?
I was the commander of the 724th Military Police Company, headquarters company at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I was a detachment commander out of the 756 Military Intelligence out of Monterey, California, the detachment out there.
So you've had quite a bit of command experience then, it sounds like.
Yes.
You haven't just
I've
filled,
had 4, sir.
you haven't filled
I've had
staff
4, yes,
positions? All right. I'm sorry if I keep interrupting you.
Not a problem, sir.
So you were appointed as the battalion commander in the middle part of 2023, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And your change of command ceremony was sometime in the latter part of June, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And your predecessor as battalion commander was Lieutenant Colonel McKinley Wood.
Yes, sir.
And you provided before today's appearance, I think 4 different text message strings, all of which have the identity of the participants redacted, the dates redacted, so they're a little bit obscure, but are those all between you and Lieutenant Colonel Wood?
Yes, sir.
And from those text messages, it appears that you were having communications with your predecessor about the unit, so you get information about what your new command would be and members of its personnel. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And in one of those text messages exchanges, you say that you were struck, I think, by the interesting makeup of the unit with multiple personalities, something like that. Do you recall that comment
Yes,
by
sir.
you?
Yes, sir.
What were you talking about?
Usually, sir, units have a few different jobs or a few different functions, and so they'll have functional people working there. So you might, if you're in a water purification unit, you might have water purification people, some logistics people within the unit. And this unit is what they call non-MOS specific. It means it could be anyone in the Army that has any type of job to be trainers. And I'll give you an example. I am a counterintelligence officer. This is an infantry unit. So you can deduct, it could be an infantry officer that commands it. My predecessor was an armor officer. So it's what's called non-MOS specific. And when I've never been in a unit like that where you have all these different people and personalities and jobs in a unit that are from different reaches of the Army Reserve and the Army.
Other than that, though, it was a typical reserve unit in that the personnel are at battle assemblies for 2 days a month and then have a 2-week session sometime, usually during the summer?
Operationally, it's very typical, but this unit is very, very special, especially the main component. You have some very senior people there that have been doing this a long time, that they've stayed with the unit for whatever reason, and they're extremely specialized people. They live in, a lot of them live in Maine, and then there's not a lot of Army Reserve units for them to transfer to. So the 3rd of the 304th works out for a lot of them. They like the unit and they love the mission, so they stay on. It's not common that I've seen in other reserve units I've been in for 25 years to see a unit like this.
And
It's a rare unit.
And several of the reservists who've testified have had decades of experience in the reserves. That was what you're observing?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And it presents different challenges when you have people like that and different experiences. Obviously, where I came out of a military intelligence world, this is a little bit different how the units run.
And the unit itself is separated into, I think, 4 companies, A, B, and C, plus a headquarters company. Is that right?
The headquarters the headquarters is like a company, but it's like an element. Yes, sir. It's a small element.
Company B or Bravo and the headquarters element are both at Saco at the Armory.
Yes, sir.
Which is where you were based as well.
Yes, sir.
But Company A is where?
Fort Dix, New Jersey, which is central New Jersey, about a half hour, 40 minutes outside of Trenton, Philadelphia.
What about Company C?
Schenectady, New York.
And does the battalion as a whole gather as a collective unit only maybe at West Point?
Sir, we get together, we collectively, we get together in the spring and the fall, usually either at Fort Dix, New Jersey, or Fort Devens for unit training.
So getting to the specific personnel in your new battalion, did you review with Lieutenant Colonel Wood any concerns that had arisen about Sergeant Robert Card?
No, I didn't.
So you were not made aware that he'd complained about being harassed by fellow soldiers sometime in the spring?
No, I didn't. I would add to that, when I heard about this in February 24, after the shooting, I called my predecessor, McKinley Wood, and I asked him specifically, did you know about any of this? And he told me, he said, I did not know any of that. It never made it to my level. I did not know. I have no reason to doubt him.
And similarly, were you aware that the Saginaw Sheriff's Deputy, Chad Carlton, in May had spoken to First Sergeant Moat about concerns regarding Robert Card? Did you know anything about that?
Sir, the first time I heard Robert Card's name was in July of 23 when he was at West Point.
What about Sergeant Sean Hodgson? Were you made aware of his circumstances when you joined as commander?
On the first day of my command, there was an incident. We had a change of command ceremony in June at West Point, which is where one commander leaves, a new commander comes in. There's a speech. It's a heraldry thing, really. The next morning, I was called about an incident regarding him and an incident that involved a Humvee.
So before that, you weren't aware of anything about Sergeant Hodgson's legal circumstances?
I was made aware within 1 day of my command.
Which is that he'd been charged with criminal behavior in Maine in state court. He had bail conditions that prohibited him from possessing firearms. Is that what you learned about?
I learned about that. I knew it was a domestic dispute, a domestic violence. So obviously he can't possess weapons while he's pending.
And that severely limited what kind of value he would have to his company. Is that right?
There are a lot of positions we have that don't involve weapons, sir.
So he was still able to attend battle assemblies?
Yes, sir.
All right. but you were aware that that was a restriction on his conduct that was pending throughout 2023, that he could not have access to firearms. Is that right? I'm sorry.
I did not know. I was not made aware of that.
So,
But like I said, once the incident at West Point occurred, they said that he had some kind of domestic dispute, and by virtue of that, he's a Lautenberg person. Under the Lautenberg Amendment, he cannot possess firearms.
and getting back to the structure of your battalion, I think we've understood all along that because the reservists themselves are part-time, it's very awkward to maintain a sort of command authority over them when they're not actually at battle assembly or at long-term drill. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
But does the unit have a core of civilian employees who are full-time, who work throughout the year?
Yes, sir. We have two there now.
Just two for the battalion?
Yes, sir.
And is one of them last name Getchell?
He retired last summer, sir.
The summer of 2023?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And who was his successor in the same role?
Devon Spates, DEVON Spates, SPATES.
And so people in those positions are available in between battle assemblies to at least forward communications and keep the members of the unit aware of situations as they're going on. So you're not limited just to communicating during battle assemblies. Is that about right?
That's one thing they do amongst many other things, sir. They could do that, yes.
Now, the battalion has a Sergeant Major, Samuel Tlumack.
Yes, sir.
And was he serving as Sergeant Major when you assumed command?
Yes, he was,
And
sir.
what is the role of the Sergeant Major in a battalion?
He provides input and guidance for me for different enlisted affairs and soldier affairs.
And he's the senior non-commissioned officer.
Yes, he is, sir.
And your battalion has would you say, a fairly small number of commissioned officers?
Yes, sir.
How many total commissioned officers in the battalion?
Give me a second. Approximately 7, sir.
And you don't have an executive officer?
I do now, sir. I didn't have one over the summer.
So the Sergeant Major really performs a pretty vital role in making sure that you are kept fully informed about circumstances within the battalion. Is that about right?
Yes, sir. Amongst many other things he does. He oversees training. He deals with promotion boards. He deals with soldier inquiries. He's very engaged with a lot of different things within the battalion. I couldn't do my job without him.
And you're aware that he's a full-time member of the Maine State Police?
I'm aware.
And there are a number of other members of the unit who are also full-time law enforcement officers. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Including Sergeant Urich?
Yes, sir.
First Sergeant Moat?
Yes, sir.
Sergeant Wainwright, who's the sheriff of Oxford County?
Yes, sir. Some of them, sir, I don't know where exactly they work. I know that they're law enforcement.
So focusing now on July at West Point, when did you learn about the incident involving Robert Card, which it spanned the late afternoon of one day and the morning of the next day? Did you learn anything about it on the late afternoon of July 15th?
I believe so, sir. I was called and they told me that he was having problems and they were going to keep him in his room.
So who was it who called you?
I believe Reamer.
Were you at West Point at the time?
No, I wasn't, sir. I was when all this happened. I didn't have any days left in my year to kind of be up there for some of this stuff, which in a perfect world I would be there, but I didn't have I had a lot of my days were used up for the year.
You sort of went quiet there for a moment. Could you finish that
Oh, I
last
went
sentence?
quiet. Oh,
Yes.
okay. The last question. I wasn't there. Usually, historically, the commander doesn't stay up there for the whole iteration. We delegate things to non-commissioned officers or officers to be in charge while this is going on. We're limited in how many days we can do a year based on fiscal constraints, but also based on my own job, my personal job that I have, or I have commitments with my own family.
I think I understand that, but does that mean Captain Reamer was probably the senior commission officer of the unit at West Point at the time? Actually, he was home in
not.
New Hampshire.
He was not there. He showed up on his own accord. When he heard about it, he drove up there.
So were
and
there
arranged
any commission officers there at West Point at the time?
No, sir.
So you heard something about it that night, and then you had further conversations the next morning. What did you learn on the morning of the 16th?
He wasn't getting better. That they wanted to do what's called, and you already kind of know this, I'm sure, command directed mental health assessment, and that's what they were going to do. They were going to take him to the emergency room. When it was initially reported to me, I had asked questions about alcohol, and I was told that there was alcohol involved. So I wasn't sure if he was drunk or if he was having a meltdown. I didn't know. But I did make an alcohol policy. I did make a no alcohol policy after that, because that was the second alcohol incident that was reported to me within a few weeks, the first being the Staff Sergeant Hodgson incident.
But by the next morning, were additional facts made known to you which showed that alcohol was not the issue?
Yes.
And who was giving you the information? Was it Captain Reamer, or was it other members of his unit?
Captain Reamer, and I believe Master Sergeant Urich.
What about Sergeant Major Klumek? Was he involved in your conversations that morning?
He was. I believe I reached out to him after, but he was not there. Again, we're limited on amount of days we can be up there. We have people there for approximately 4 to 5 weeks a year, just for the summer surge. So we have to be very judicious about when we go up there and maintaining other training commitments we have throughout the fiscal year outside of the summer.
Once you heard that they wanted to do a command-directed evaluation, did you have any concerns about that, or did it sound to you like the appropriate response?
It sounded completely appropriate, sir.
Have you ever done a command-directed evaluation of any member of units that you've commanded in the past?
I've done several.
So you're aware of the requirements, and they probably would strike most of us as fairly steep, that you can't just order somebody into that if you don't like the way they're acting. They have to be a significant problem, behavioral health problem, most likely. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Later on, First Sergeant Moat participated in the creation of what's called a CCIR, I think. What do those initials stand for?
Commander's Critical Information Report. It's basically a way from the field to tell upper, hey, we're having an issue, or we want to report something. There's a whole litany of things that we can report.
And have you read that?
I have it in front of me.
And it's marked as Exhibit 14. Is that right?
I don't have 14 in front of me, but I believe I have that CCIR. If you give me a second. I don't have it here, sir. I thought I had it. I don't have it here. Let me double check though. I had everything. I thought I had everything ready.
But you've read it in the past?
Yes, sir.
So even though you don't have it in front of you, I'll just refer to you to a couple of portions of that.
Sure, sir.
And at one point, First Sergeant Moat says, he, meaning Card, looked at me with 1,000-yard stare as if he was looking straight through me. You recall him reporting that in the CCIR?
I do remember that, and the clenching of the fists. Yes, sir.
What's the expression 1,000-yard stare mean to you?
To me, it's a colloquial old military term or law enforcement term, meaning that someone might maybe in distress.
Do you know if it historically
It's not
originated?
scientific at all.
Pardon me?
I don't know, sir. I don't know. It's not a scientific term.
I understand that, but did it originate in soldiers having what used to be called battle fatigue?
I don't know, sir.
But does it sound to you like something that would be consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder? And I understand you're not an expert, but does that sound like something that would be shown by a soldier with that condition?
I guess it could be, sir. I don't want to opine on that.
Towards the end of his narrative, he said, Card stared right through me. He never blinked. He never acknowledged what I was telling him. He just sat there and stared at me. Do you recall him saying that?
I do remember that. I read it.
And finally, he closes by saying the psychologist at Keller Army Hospital stated he did believe Card was suffering from a psychosis.
Yes, sir. I read it.
So that was Robert Card's status as of the day he was at Keller Hospital, and the psychologist ordered him to do further evaluation, and that had to be at a civilian hospital. Did you understand that?
I did understand that.
And in situations where you've directed examinations in the past, has that any evaluation and subsequent treatment been at purely at a military hospital, or has there been this mixture of military and civilian?
Mixture.
And is it your understanding that the military does not have hospitals with behavioral health units, a very large number of them across the country?
I don't know this. I don't know the status of the other hospitals. I know it's challenging to get care sometimes within a military treatment facility for anything, sir. Sometimes you could be even a dental appointment.
All right. See, we understood that Robert Card was going to be at a civilian hospital for a while. Did you monitor how his treatment was progressing during that time?
I spoke to Captain Reamer about what was going on a few times.
And at some point you learned that he'd been rather unexpectedly discharged from Four Winds Hospital. How did you learn about that?
Captain Reamer told me. We also had to coordinate to get him paid, to get his what they call orders extended for this. So we had to track that administratively as well. I don't know what you understand, but at that time of year, believe it or not, in the summer, deep summer, it is close to the end of the fiscal year, and getting orders cut that weren't like planned out ahead of time can be challenging.
All right. So I think we've also provided you what we've entitled Exhibit 10B, which was the Form 3822. Are you able to pull that up?
I don't have that, sir.
What is the Form 3822?
Is that the outpatient when he leaves? Is his?
Well, the title of it is Report of Mental Status Evaluation.
Yes, I've seen that, sir.
And again, without having it in front of you, are you aware that the recommendation is as follows? Service member's chain of command stay engaged with this service member's case, and that once discharged to home of residence, HOR, be followed up with case management and brigade medical officer. You were aware that that was what they
Brigade.
recommended?
Yes, sir. I was aware. I also know that the DoD instruction that monitors all this spells out what's supposed to happen as well, and some of the things that the medical people did not do, or it just didn't equate, didn't happen. The DoD instruction is 6490-.04. It outlines all of the responsibilities for the different parties for this mental health evaluations and members of military services.
But in this case, the recommendation, when it refers to a brigade medical officer, there wasn't a brigade medical officer, so that wasn't going to happen anyway.
No, sir. We don't have a brigade medical officer. We have someone that works in that capacity. I think you asked earlier if we had a surgeon, a brigade medical surgeon. We don't have it. We have somebody who works administratively on medical issues, but it is a secondary role for them within the brigade.
Are they a reservist or a civilian?
Civilian.
And where is that civilian based?
Kentucky, sir.
Kentucky?
Yes, sir.
The same sentence goes on and says command and RMO. What's the RMO?
Resource Management Officer.
Initiate MEB process. What's MEB?
Military Evaluation Board. It's essentially to get, if he's not fit for duty or the serviceman is not fit for duty, we can do a medical evaluation board.
The last clause or sentences, it is also recommended that measures be taken to safely remove all firearms and weapons from the service member's home of residence. You recall that part of the report?
Yes, sir.
And what, if any, restrictions do you have as a member of the reserves on removing weapons from a reservist?
I don't have a Fourth Amendment. I can't take his Fourth Amendment away. I don't have authority to write a search warrant or write seizure authority for his personal property.
And I may not remember this accurately, but is there a federal statute that actually prohibits privately owned weapons of reservists from being seized by the Army? If you know.
You'd have to ask a JAG. You could do it on a military installation if you had a military search authority, which is like a search warrant, but on the Uniform Criminal Code of Military Justice.
In any event, you were aware that that was their recommendation, that measures be taken to remove the weapons.
Yes, I also know that his medical profile when he left, said he was a low threat, keep away from weapons due to his medication. I also have that, the profile that when he left. And I believe First Sergeant Moat tried to get his weapon, tried to communicate to the locals to get his weapons. And I also believe that Staff Sergeant Hodgson had tried to work something out with his family to get the weapons or to secure them. But I don't have the authority to go to his house. My people aren't trained to go retrieve weapons at somebody's house like that. I would have to get Mr. Card's permission to search his house to seize his weapons. And I don't have anywhere to put them. I have a memo here I can send to you from the regional director for Maine that says I cannot store personally owned weapons in my reserve center. So
when was that memo distributed?
I got that memo. I got it. I can send it. I got an email from the Force Protection Officer dated May 30th, 2024. It says U.S. Army Reserve Command has no policy prohibiting storage of personal owned weapons. Units just need to follow exact regulation. Says for documentation accountability. Then the person says, that being said, the 99th Regional Director doesn't specifically authorize or recommend the practice. We advise you to carefully consult with your SJA as to the implications of a course of action before finalizing it. It remains, however, that no POWs will personally owned weapons will be authorized in any 99th RD facilities for open concealed carry purposes pursuant to U.S. Code 18, Section 30A.
And that's a memo that just came out about 2 weeks ago.
It's an email. We inquired about this because I was preparing for the hearing here. I knew that was going to come up. That when the reserve component did its investigation, the internal investigation, that was one of the findings, saying we didn't store his weapons. But when we asked the person who can tell us if we can store the weapons legally, that was the response I got in May.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Vazquez, that's a very interesting answer, because we have not received any sort of investigative findings from the Army to this point.
The one I got, what I got, sir, that's one of the things they had asked about. Why didn't you? They asked the same question you asked. Why didn't you store the weapons? Why didn't you get his weapons? And I had the same answer. I don't. One, he has a Fourth Amendment right. I don't have the right. I can't go into his house. That purely falls on local officials and/or federal officials in his area. I don't have that right. I don't have that authority. Excuse me.
Yeah. Does that mean if a service member, a reserve unit member, wanted to have the weapons stored at the armory, you would have to say no?
I would have to ask for higher permission or say no. Yes, sir. We're not. The way we're constructed would be very challenging to do anything like that with all the different provisions we have to secure our own official weapons that belong to the Army.
But you're aware of some documents in the fall of last year where there was a discussion about how storing them at the Army was not necessary because an alternative process had been initiated with a family. So it was not offered to Sergeant Card to store them at the Armory. You're aware of that?
No, I'm not. I know by deduction I'm aware of it, but I know that something was worked out with the family, and I know that the local officials were notified by First Sergeant Mote about his concerns.
All right, so turning your attention now to September 15th, which is a Friday. How did you learn about the text that Sergeant Hodgson sent to Captain Reamer and First Sergeant Mote in the middle of the night? How did you first learn about that?
Reamer contacted me immediately.
And where were you?
I was at my house in Massachusetts.
And did you also, well, first of all, did you read the text at that time? Did he forward it to you by email or give you access to it?
Yes. He read it to me verbatim, sir.
And I think First Sergeant Mote testified for this commission that when he read that, basically the hair stood up on the back of his neck or something like that. He had a visceral response to reading that. Did you have the same response?
I was concerned, sir.
And it talks about a mass shooting.
You came in broken, sir. Could you repeat?
He actually refers to a mass shooting.
Yes, sir.
So as a result of your discussion with Captain Reamer, and by the way, was Sergeant Major Slumack involved in that discussion as well?
I believe so, sir. We discussed it.
And what did you decide to do?
I believe the locals were notified of it. Visit went to his house. We had the local police surveil the area as security in Saco. I believe Captain Reamer followed up with a phone call to Mr. Card to check on his status.
And you were not involved in the conversations with local law enforcement yourself. It was Captain Reamer and First Sergeant Mote doing that?
Yes, sir.
And one of the other documents just sent to you was what's entitled Exhibit 8, which is the transcript of the interview between Captain Reamer, not interview, telephone call between Captain Reamer Sergeant Schofield. Do you have that?
Yeah, that's which exhibit number is that?
Exhibit 8.
8. Okay, give me a second, sir. Yes, I got it right in front of me, sir.
And on page 89 at the top,
Jeff,
Captain Reamer says,
Jeff, let
you're
the,
changing interpreters.
okay, thank you.
I only have 6 pages for that, sir. For the Captain Schofield Reamer conversation.
You need to stop talking until we have a new interpreter, I believe.
Oh, sorry about that.
All right, getting back to Exhibit 8, it's got page numbers that include at the bottom 89, 88,
I see it,
87.
sir. I see it now. I see
So
it.
at the top of
87, 80.
top of page 89, Captain Reamer says, I just talked with my battalion commander and sergeant major. One works for the government, federal government, and the other works for the Maine State Police. You see that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So Captain Reamer clearly from this had just gotten through discussing what the next step should be. Is that right?
Yes, sir. When he spoke to us, he told us the steps he was taking, sir.
And he says just below that, we hashed it out in the next sentence or so. We just wanted to check well-being. If you kind of tell he's there and alive, just kind of document it. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you intended?
Usually, well, that's a 2-part question, sir. One of the reasons that Captain Reamer is referring to that is that he was a no-show. A card was not at drill that weekend. He's a no-show. We call it an unsatisfactory participant. Usually when that happens, we like to reach out to the person and check on their well-being. Did they have a car accident? Is something going on at home? So that this is a 2-part. This is the company commander coming out in him, how he is wording this. Document it because we want to be able to document that we did send the police out in case something happened, and so we can tell internally, we can track this. We like to track when soldiers don't show up, who called them, who sent an email, who texted them. That's a requirement for us to track people that don't show up.
But this was a far different situation than a reservist not showing up for drill. Isn't that
Correct,
right?
sir. Correct. I can't give you an opinion as to what Captain Reamer meant by that, but the way I read it, again, I see it twofold. There is a concern. He does have a concern with Card. He wouldn't be speaking to Mr. Schofield if he didn't have a concern, but he's also wants to see, is he okay? Saying that there and just kind of alive is something, it's kind of like a slang term that we use sometimes in the military to say, oh, is he alive? Is he dead in a ditch or something along those lines? But you'd have to ask Captain Reamer exactly what he meant about that.
Well, he's testified twice, and so I think we've probably gotten about as much information from him as we're going to get. But just reading it on the cold page here, it sounds like he's understating the significance of what he's asking law enforcement to do. Does it strike you that way?
I don't have an opinion on that. The way I see it, he had a concern. He was expressing his concern to the local police. If he was to opine heavier or to interfere, I don't know how the local police would have taken it. Local law enforcement knows their people better than, knows their own policy and on how they do it. I don't think Captain Reamer was in a position to tell Mr. Schofield how to do his job.
At the bottom of that same page, Captain Reamer says, but we confirmed that he was, alive and breathing, and then we can go from there. What does that "we can go from there" mean to you?
It means we'll eventually try to get, I don't know what he meant by it. The way I read it, we can go from there. In other words, he doesn't know what the situation is probably. He wants to figure out what his next step is, to contact him, to document that he wasn't at drill, which is Captain Reamer's duty. We have to account for everybody who's not at drill. We have to code them in certain codes. Do they have an excused absence, an unexcused absence? Do they have a medical issue? Are they on order somewhere else? Captain Reamer has he's obliged to account for this soldier.
Oh, okay, I understand. So do you know why this communication with the Saugatuck SO was through Ellsworth PD rather than directly from Captain Rimmer to Saugatuck SO?
I imagine because First Sergeant Moat worked there. I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Because I think it's been described as kind of convoluted. It sort of strikes me that way as well.
I don't know. You'd have to ask Captain Reamer why they did that. The geography up in Maine, I'm not great with the counties. I'll be honest with you.
Right. So you probably didn't know this either, but the town of Bowdoin, where Robert Card lived, does not have a municipal police department. Did you understand that?
I was told he lived in a rural area and they had a sheriff.
So the only two law enforcement entities that could be referred to as the sheriff's department and the Maine State Police. Did you consider making the referral to the Maine State Police instead?
No.
Even
We usually I'll tell you why. Usually when I've done, we in the military we'll say a health and welfare. So usually in the past, I can't speak for other commanders. When I've done these sort of things, I try to go to the lowest level. So I'm not gonna, I go into the Maine State Police. When I think of the Maine State Police, and I don't know all the jurisdictions. I'm not a legal person in Maine. I assume Maine State Police means highways. Sheriff is more local. So I would go to the sheriff first. Historically, that's what I've done in the past. We've called the local police for what's called a health and welfare. So we have a soldier who's not responding, a soldier we don't know where they're at. I've always been on the side of going to the lowest. I don't want to say lowest, but the smallest department.
But what we've been told is that Saugatuck Sheriff's Department often has only 2 or 3 people working for the entire county. And
okay, I don't know I don't know what their staffing levels are. I don't know what their coverage is. Historically, I've always gone to the lowest, not the lowest, but the most local we can go to. A lot of times, those locals will know the area, know the people, maybe have a relationship within that community. A state policeman, I don't know what relationship they have outside of the highway. Again, I'm not in the law enforcement community up in Maine. I don't know the jurisdictions, and I'm not sure what everybody does.
I understand that, but you had a sergeant major who is a long-term member of the Maine State Police who could have explained to you the breadth of responsibilities of the state police. They don't just do traffic. But you didn't talk to him about that?
I did not even think of it because, again, historically, I've always gone to the lowest jurisdiction. With that being said, could we have called the FBI on it because they deal with this too? I don't know. I'm just saying. I always go to the lowest, the most local, because again, I believe that the local sheriff has the best knowledge of their area, the people in it, who they police.
So were you aware that First Sergeant Moat had prepared a very long, detailed narrative about Robert Card's history?
I found out after the shooting.
Only after the shooting?
What it said, like the specifics of it.
And when you read it, were you surprised that he'd gone into all that detail?
Not at all. He's a law enforcement officer in the state of Maine. I believe he was using his writing skills and ability to try to get something done the best he could. And I believe he probably didn't want to leave any details out to be as thorough as he could be, because that's the kind of person he is. Everything I get from him is flawless.
And he also told us that he intended that to be basically a probable cause statement for a yellow flag application.
That's
And
what he explained to me too.
And you being from another state, do you know anything about the yellow flag law, or did you know anything about it before the shootings?
I knew they existed. I didn't know the specifics of them. And I know that they're different from every state to state.
All right. So just a few more questions for me. After those events in the middle part of September,
Yes.
do you know what efforts were made to secure Robert Card's firearms after that?
I believe his family was involved. That's all I know. That's all I know. I believe that First Sergeant Moat wrote his letter. I believe that the sheriff didn't action it. That's kind of that. I believe that was First Sergeant Moat his intent, and you can clarify with him, was to initiate that yellow flag. And I think he did it because he's outside of the county. He couldn't do it himself where his jurisdiction was. That's what it was explained to me. Again, I'm not great with the geography.
But getting back to the text message from Sergeant Hodgson, doesn't it appear to you that he's saying that Robert Card still has his personal weapons?
It does. It's a text. You're right. It is a text. You're right. I don't have any verification of it. And that's why Captain Reamer notified the locals, the sheriff.
Which suggests that any efforts the Army had been making between his discharge from Four Winds Hospital until September 15th had not been successful in securing weapons.
Could be. I don't know. It's a text. I have no. I don't have any evidence. I don't have any evidence that says that the weapons were taken and the weapons weren't taken. That he got another weapon. He had it hidden. I don't have any of that evidence.
Okay.
To base an opinion or to be able to answer that.
So during this period in September and October, was Robert Card in the course of retiring from the Army Reserves, or had an effort been made to start that process?
That's a broad question, sir, and I'll give you an explanation of it. He told Captain Reamer that I believe Captain Reamer, and you can check what he said to you. He said, I'm not, he said, I'm all right. Or I just want to retire. I just want to retire. To retire out of the reserves, believe it or not, is arduous. It's not a simple process. It's not telling your company commander, I want to retire, and 2 weeks later you get a letter in the mail. That's not what happens. There's a lot of paperwork that's got to get filled out. It could take months to do that. And we have many soldiers who go through this process of saying they want to retire, but don't actually initiate paperwork. Because once they initiate paperwork, certain things have to happen. They're in a different status. Does that make sense?
Well, I think so. And is that frequently done by the platoon commander for the individual reservists?
Well, obviously, Captain Reamer was in communicado with him, wanted to know his status. What are you doing? You're not showing up. And he expressed an interest in retiring. So yeah, that's common. He could have just went to the personnel office and done it, but he gave his company commander the word that's what he was doing.
I asked a poor question. There are sergeants who are actually commanders of the individual platoons within Company B. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Section sergeants. Yes, sir. Yes.
And who was the sergeant for Robert Card's section? Do you know?
I believe he answered to First Sergeant Moat.
All right.
I could be wrong on that. I don't know. When I came to the unit, they were going to West Point. I didn't get to see the formation the way it was and how it was set up exactly, but he did have I believe he did have a good relationship with First Sergeant Moat.
Is there a sergeant named Ubble or something like that in
Yeah.
Humble? Is it
Yes.
possible he's the section sergeant?
He could have been for that, sir.
All right. But in any event, none of that had happened by October 25th,
Well, none of what, sir?
the retirement plan paperwork.
No, it's like I said, it's a two-part question. So he says, I'm going to retire. The company commander or the leader believes them on face value, but until they have the paperwork done or the process done, it's just words at that point, sir. But I do believe Card, I think in October or September, hit his 20-year mark where he was eligible to retire.
When did you learn about the shootings?
The night of.
And how did you learn that Robert Card was the suspect?
I spoke to my personnel people. We verified the shooter's name, and he verified it for me. On the news, like a lot of other people, we cross-referenced.
And at that point, your unit immediately began looking into what led up to it. Is that fair?
Not my unit, the U.S. Army and the U.S. Army Reserve Command. It wasn't just my unit. It was treated as a whole Army concept, yeah.
And one of the documents that was sent to you last week is Exhibit 17, which is a memo.
The timeline?
Well, it has a cover paragraph and then a timeline.
Okay, let me get it, yeah. Yes,
and
sir.
it's from Colonel Christina Green.
Yes, sir.
And what is her role within your division?
She is the division commander. Now, she's actually a brigadier general right now, so this is before she was promoted. She is 2 up on me. She's my senior raider, as we say.
All right. So she was the brigade commander at that time, or is now?
She was the division commander. She was the division commander then, sir. She hadn't been promoted yet. It was a administrative issue. She was sitting in the seat of a brigadier general's position.
Oh, is this because of the senatorial hold on promotions?
I believe so, sir.
But it's addressed to you, to Captain Reamer, and to Colonel Besick.
Besick. Yes, AJ Besick. He is my brigade commander. He is the one that is in between General Green and myself.
And then finally, Jason Rogers, who is identified as a civilian.
He is a suicide prevention manager for the division. He's more than suicide prevention. He deals with anybody in any type of mental crisis that reach out to him or have heard.
And the cover sheet on this timeline says team attached is the timeline that LTG, is that Lieutenant General?
Lieutenant General Daniels, that is the 3-star U.S. Army Reserve Component Commander. She's responsible for all Army reservists in the United States.
All right. And that's first name of Lieutenant General Daniels is what?
Jody.
And she's the senior officer for all reservists for the entire country. Yes,
sir.
And tracking is based on what provided to her by her G33. What's a G33?
Like an operations person that deals in operations. It's a staff member, essentially.
And this is dated October 29th, so it's Sunday, 4 days
Yes,
after
sir.
the shootings. And at that point, the Army was already putting together a timeline for contact between the Army and Robert Card throughout 2023.
We put that timeline, sir, you're correct. That timeline actually started basically the night of the shooting and into the early next day. It morphed, as we gathered more information, verified certain things. It was a living, breathing document.
And Exhibit 20 also provided to you.
Yes, sir. Let me just make it bigger. Okay, go ahead, sir.
And that's from Master Sergeant Patrick Dean.
Yes, sir. He works in our unit. He worked in our unit. He doesn't work there anymore. He was a full-time member of the unit. He's what's called active guard and reserve. He deals in operations and he is a Swiss Army knife of the unit, sir. Does a lot of different things.
All right, it says committee chief. Is that a title
That means
he had?
yes, sir. It's the way the unit's broken down. You use the term platoon sergeant. You could say committee chief as well. It's just
Right.
it's specific to our unit.
And he is a full-time Department of Defense employee.
He is a full-time green suitor. That's a slang term for a full-time soldier, sir, that works for the Army Reserves.
Okay, so he would, and is he based at the Saco Armory?
Not anymore, sir. Now he's in Londonderry, New Hampshire. He transferred out about 2 months ago, sir.
But was he in Saco back in October?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think he had been there for about 4 years in the unit.
So again, he's somebody who helped be a conduit of information in between weekend drills and so on. He'd be in a position to keep track of Robert Card in between battle assemblies.
Amongst the other 210 people in the battalion, yes, sir.
You're doing an
Yeah,
interpreter switch?
Okay.
Sorry. I think you're good, Jeff.
All right, thank you. And this Exhibit 20, this memo is dated Thursday, October 26th at 11:04 a.m.
21.
So this is about 16 hours after the shootings. And
Yes, sir.
so by that time, Patrick Dean and Sergeant Dean was already in a position to describe recent events involving Robert Card.
Master Sergeant Dean was part of what I would describe as my triage crew to put all this together. We were under obviously tremendous pressure by everyone involved to kind of put together a timeline. So Dean was kind of orchestrating this to ask questions and put it together almost like a research paper.
And that same weekend were individual members of the reserves being interviewed by Army investigators?
A couple of them were, but they were interviewed that weekend in regards to the location of Mr. Card, because at the time Mr. Card was out and about. We didn't know where he was. It was a pretty large manhunt out there looking for him. So I believe Captain Reamer was interviewed. I think Dean might have been interviewed.
And eventually, not right away, but were you interviewed by Army investigators as well?
Sometime in November, sir.
And again, the reason I ask that is because the investigation is still open, and therefore we've never been provided with documents, interviews of any of the reservists in his unit that I'm aware of. So this has been somewhat of a hindrance to our work, even though the Army was doing its investigation within days of the events.
Well, sir, I just kind of want to say you're correct. When you say investigation, again, that's a little bit of, that's a kind of a loaded question. The investigation that I was made aware of was they were asking questions about Card's status so they could figure out where he might be, because at the time, I don't know, he wasn't really considered a fugitive, but there was a manhunt, and they were looking for what I recall was tactical information. Where could he be? Any kind of clues, because they weren't sure if, he was still alive, he was on the hunt. The investigation that you're referring to that the reserve component did started, I believe, in November. And they interviewed and looked at all the things that involved the reserve component.
I understand. So Exhibit 21 also provided to you is a memo from Jason Rogers.
Yes, let me get that, sir. Give me a second. Yes, sir, I got it. 21. Let me just blow it up a little bit so I can read it. My eyes aren't great.
Sure. And this is addressed
Go ahead.
to, it's addressed from Jason Rogers, who was identified as a civilian. What's his role in the division?
He is the suicide prevention manager for the division. So he has a responsibility of ensuring the programs are up and running, taking phone calls from commanders with distressed or people that may have ideations or may have concerns with. And I believe he can see medical records and he tracks different medical cases.
And it's addressed to Major Dean DeMello, who is what, or was what?
He's an attorney. He's an attorney with the division.
And also to civilian Nathan Kane, who was that?
He's a division operations guy. He works for Brigadier General Christina Green.
And also addressed to Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Leslie.
He is one of our lawyers with the division.
And this is dated November 8th, and it's regarding the storage of Robert Card's weapons. And apparently it's responding to a media inquiry.
That's what it looks like, sir. That's what it looks like.
And page 2 is apparently the response from Captain Reamer.
Okay. Yes, sir.
And he states in that upon Robert Card's discharge from Four Winds Hospital, a plan had already been developed and implemented that Sergeant Card's personally owned weapons were to be removed and secured by his family. It was determined that it was not necessary to offer to have him voluntarily secure his weapons at the Saco Reserve Center. Were you aware that that was his response?
No, I wasn't aware that that was his response. I saw this email I just now. Well, not now, but this week.
And this is not you're not one of the people included in this email distribution list.
Correct, sir.
And again, you've told us earlier today that as of a couple of weeks ago, that the Army could not store his personally owned weapons at the Reserve Center. But what he's saying back in November is that that was an option, but that was not necessary to offer it to him because the family was supposed to secure them.
Again, that's two-part. One, I can't speak for him. He was under the impression that he told me that Hodgson had worked and they had worked something with the family to take the weapons. And where he says it was determined it's not necessary to offer to have him voluntarily secure his weapons. He hadn't talked to me about that. Had he spoken to me about securing the weapons, I would have called my lawyer, my Army lawyer, and they would have told me what the parameters were and were not to do that.
Of course, Sergeant Hodgson at that point had a bail condition of no firearms, so he couldn't personally move any of the weapons. He was just going to be a facilitator. Is that about right?
Correct, sir. Correct, sir. But at the time, that was all I had. That was the best communication we had with Robert Card. He wasn't communicating very freely with Captain Reamer. I can't force him to communicate. I have no authority to do that when he's not on orders.
I understand. And the last of the several documents that I think has been sent to you is actually a memo that you created. It's Exhibit 24.
I don't think I have. I gotta look. I don't think I have it. Is it the alcohol thing?
It's actually dated November 1st and says, begins, group this did not send last night. Spell out any limits. When police went to his residence, Captain Reamer B Company had no authority nor ability to force him to answer a door. Do you recall writing that memo?
Yes.
And it's addressed to your brigade commander, Colonel Bisick.
Besic, yes.
Besick, I'm sorry. The divisional commander, Christina Green,
Yes, sir.
and to the captain.
Yes, sir. That was a clarification of a question that must have come up. I don't recall exactly. It was a clarification. Because again, we don't really have Captain Reamer, as Captain Reamer, does not have the authority to go in and take Mr. Card's weapons against his will. He can consent, obviously, but he doesn't have. He's not. We're not, as commanders, we're not in positions of authority to do that. We are in positions to contact local law enforcement, as Captain Reamer did, as First Sergeant Moat did.
Well, the last long paragraph on the second page of this, I'll just read to you. Diagnosis, unit did not have specifics of the diagnosis. Why is the word diagnosis in there? Why did you use that?
I believe someone must have asked about the diagnosis. Did you have a I don't recall exactly, sir. That was a really difficult time for me emotionally, and it melded into physically as well. Very emotional time for me.
I understand.
My soldier had just, okay, let me just put you in my frame of mind. My soldier had just killed 18 people and then killed himself. So a lot of what was happening was that was going on around me emotionally is not tough to recall sometimes, but challenging.
Yes. It says unit did not have specifics of the diagnosis. The diagnosis from Keller was psychosis.
We didn't have that at that time, sir. We got that after. Again, if I may, when you look at the DoD instruction that I talked about that highlights all of this, it explains the responsibility of the clinic to explain to the commanders and local law enforcement about the service member that's being discharged and or what their treatment is if there's problems that they foresee coming. And I can give you the Department of Defense instruction that governs all of that.
So that when you say clinic, you mean Four Winds Hospital?
Yes, sir. Four Winds Hospital was contracted by the government, but I imagine that they were under some they were under some kind of jurisdiction of the military treatment facility that contracted them.
But I think we heard from Lieutenant Colonel Ochoa last week that if the service member doesn't want to have the civilian hospital communicate with his unit, he doesn't have to consent. Is that your understanding?
If Colonel Ochoa said that, then I conversely, I don't have a way that I know of as a commander, a part-time commander, to make someone speak to me that doesn't want to speak to me or as commander outside of me calling local police. I don't have that authority. He's not in my purview. I can't lock him up in the barracks. I don't have that. I can ask, I can email, I can text, but I can't force somebody.
So in the last sentence of this is the next to last sentence. Follow-up to compliance to discharge instructions was not communicated to the unit.
Was not, sir.
Meaning by the
compliance within the DoD instruction. The DoD instruction highlights what the responsibilities are of the medical treatment facility or the care facility that the service member is at, and it doesn't show. We were not notified about psychosis, about anything like that. Again, his profile when he left said keep away. He was a low threat, keep away from weapons due to his medication. It didn't say because he could be a shooter. It didn't say anything like that.
All right, thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Vazquez. I've asked a myriad of questions, but I think my colleagues may have some follow-up, starting with Mr. Dilworth.
Okay, sir. I hope I answered him the best I could.
I believe you did.
Okay, Mr. Dilworth.
Good morning, Lieutenant Colonel. How are you?
I'm fine, sir.
Let me follow up on the several questions you were asked. Do I understand you to say that your unit didn't know the diagnosis of psychosis until
No, sir.
they know what?
No, no, sir, we didn't.
Well, I'm looking at the CCIR that Sergeant Moat prepared. You had that, right?
Yes, sir. I think, but the CCIR is what they told him there in a triage situation. But as far as like a formal diagnosis, I thought that's what you meant, sir.
Well, I mean, the healthcare provider told your people, your subordinates, the card was suffering from psychosis, right?
Right, sir. But I didn't see, I don't, usually when in the past, when I've done something like this, when I've done these, they actually will send you something that highlights or will kind of give you an idea what the person's suffering from.
Okay.
I'm not sure in an emergency room how that if that's an actual diagnosis at the emergency room. I don't know.
Well, they did talk to Captain Reamer several times, right?
They did, sir.
At both Keller and Four Winds.
Right, sir.
And did you ever ask Reamer about following up regarding this initial diagnosis of psychosis?
I did not, because Reamer was calling me and telling me what was going on. I didn't have to ask him.
And what did he tell you regarding the diagnosis?
He didn't talk about the diagnosis. He talked about he's in there. They're evaluating him, and they at one point they said they're going to have a hearing on Friday. They didn't reach out to him. They didn't follow up with him on it. And it appeared, and I don't know exactly, without looking at his phone records, it appeared that he was trying to reach out to them more than they were reaching out to him, if they were reaching out to him.
Okay. But you knew the initial diagnosis was psychosis, and they were going to keep him or transport him over to Four Winds, and they kept him there for 2 weeks, right?
Yes, sir.
So you knew, you could draw from that he had been diagnosed with some mental health disorder, correct?
I knew, I knew that they're not going to admit him without some kind of mental health disorder. I knew that. They generally will not do that. I knew he was having some trouble. I also was under the impression that there was alcohol involved, and that he was in the triage area for a day or so. To be diagnosed with psychosis right away, if that was accurate, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I just kind of know what they said, and I know that they wanted more treatment and more evaluation. You're muted, sir. You're muted.
We're having trouble hearing you, Toby.
No, we still can't hear you. It's a good time for an interpreter switch.
We're going to do that now.
Yeah, given we can't hear Toby.
Toby, your audio is showing as being turned off. Can you check down at the bottom of your screen, please?
Yeah, I think logging out and coming back in, Toby, might, because you were coming in loud and clear until suddenly you weren't, and so maybe.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I just got bounced out. The exhibit that we previously marked as Exhibit 10B is the report of mental status evaluation. And it includes recommendations to the commander. Did you ever see this document?
No, I didn't, sir. Not till after.
Okay. Is this the sort of thing that you would want to see, or is this something that you would leave to the first sergeant and Captain Reamer to handle?
This is, knowing with 2020 hindsight, this is something I would want to see.
Well, yeah, I understand that in hindsight, but at the time, how many service members were in your command?
211, approximately.
And did you leave most of these personnel issues, you know, people needing mental health treatment, that sort of thing, to your first sergeant and Captain Reamer?
Well, this unit, that was the first one I had like that. In previous units, when there's an issue, the facility reaches out to the commander and gives them a very thorough evaluation. And I didn't get that.
Is it something, today you would want to see it? Is that fair to say?
With 2020 hindsight, sir, yes.
Okay. It has several recommendations, and one of them is to ensure that the service member attends all follow-up appointments. And you testified a little bit earlier about the limitations you have as a reserve commander.
Yes, sir. I can't, if they're not compliant with their treatment, I don't have a lot of tools in my toolbox legally to do anything.
Is one of the tools that you do have is to require them to attend a battle assembly?
They are by definition, they're ordered to attend a battle assembly. By definition, they are, sir, unless they have an excused absence.
And you know that Card did not attend the September and October battle assemblies, right?
Yes, sir.
despite the fact that he had missed about 10 appointments with the BHP or AMM or C personnel.
Yes, sir.
So why not require him and compel him to come to the battle assembly?
Because you'd have to ask Captain Reamer. He can speak to it more intelligently because he dealt with it directly. Based on what he told me, Card really didn't want to be part of the Army. He wanted to retire, and he was angry about what had occurred over the summer. And Captain Reamer said, okay, again, First Sergeant Moat had notified the state, had notified the county. We had called the police. I have soldiers in multiple different states. To go to each one of them's house that doesn't show up would be I would get nothing done.
Okay, but let me go back and just play out a scenario and tell me how your response. He doesn't respond to the request for follow-up with BHP or the other providers. He makes threats on September 15 to the unit. What if he was compelled to come to the battle assembly in September or October, and at that time, command directed to go into a evaluation, a mental evaluation? Could that have happened?
It could have happened, but again, I can't handcuff him and take him to one of these facilities. I don't have that authority.
No, but if
he did not want to go.
Sorry.
If he did not want to go, he told me, sir, I refuse to do this. I don't have a lot of good tools in my toolbox at that point, other than maybe calling local law enforcement and let them deal with it.
But he could have issued a command directive when he was at a battle assembly, right?
I guess so, sir. But again, kind of goes back to what I said. I'm not sure the traction he would have got based on the history of Mr. Card. He wasn't very compliant with Reamer before. He told Reamer, I just want to move on. I want to retire. If we were on active duty on a full military installation, it might be a little bit different.
Okay.
But I don't have military police. We're not structured that way.
Okay. But let's assume he attended the September, he being Card, attended the September, October battle assemblies. At that point, his commanding officer could have issued a command directive to receive treatment immediately, right?
He could do that, and I don't want to speculate because it's not within the construct of this hearing, but he could do that. If he showed up, I guess he could do that, but I don't know whether he would have done it. That would have been the second one in a few months. I've done several of these, and these are really based on in the reserves. They're really based on the compliance of the individual service member. If they're not compliant, I don't have a lot of tools, and neither does Captain Reamer.
Well, I understood from Captain Reamer that if he didn't comply, he could be disciplined.
He could be disciplined. Discipline ranges from a negative counseling statement to Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Right.
Action, legal action.
Is this something that just wasn't ever considered, or was it considered and rejected?
It wasn't considered because he had just two things. One, he got out of a mental health, command-directed mental health in August of that year, a month prior. Again, First Sergeant Moat had notified the local police, told them essentially this guy is an issue, or may have some challenges, and it would have been very difficult to, one, he wasn't communicating with us on a regular basis.
Well, that's another question that I have. In terms of the person who was coordinating with him with a card after his release from the hospital in New York was primarily Hodges, right?
Yes, he didn't want to communicate, from what I remember, with other people. He was very angry at the time.
So in terms, it was inconsistent with the chain of command for Hodgkins to be coordinating with Card about treatment, right?
I don't know whether he didn't, Hodgson, I don't know what he was talking to about treatment. I don't know anything about that, but I do know that was our main, he wasn't communicating with other people. That I can't force someone to speak to me. I don't have, or speak to Reamer. So sometimes in cases like this where the soldiers aren't really responsive, you do what you can to get to communicate with them. They're not all going to want to communicate with me. They're not all going to want to communicate with Reamer.
So reservists have the right to not talk to a superior officer?
No, they don't have that right, but it's very hard to discipline them if they don't. We can put them out eventually. If we have the right paperwork, we can discharge them, but for not showing up or insubordination, but that process is very slow. And that soldier had indicated he wanted to retire. He had the time to retire. And we had notified the local sheriff on his condition.
So in terms of this report of mental status evaluation and the recommendations, such as the recommendation that the service member's chain of command stay engaged with the service member's care, are you saying that it's effectively toothless, that it's just a recommendation, and there's no way that the reserve could have complied with this recommendation?
I didn't say it. I would not describe it as toothless, but that presents a challenge if you have a service member who doesn't want to communicate, or wants to get out, or doesn't want to participate. It also says that the profile that I got also says he's a low threat. So,
and he was,
know,
according to them, in July 23rd. That's before September, when he sent the threat, or Hodgson sent
correct, sir.
the threat.
Correct. But that was what I had at the time, sir. That's what I had at that time.
And you had the notice of the threat, certainly, right?
We had the notice of the threat, sir. That's why Captain Reamer contacted the local police.
And do I understand from your testimony earlier that you put weight on the fact that it was a text that you got from Hodgson and not some other evidence?
Well, that's a great question. How do you weight a text? If you would have had a text, to me, is just as good from one of my soldiers as the soldier saying it. So I really wasn't putting weight on it. If that came across that way, that wasn't my intent at all.
I mean,
I believe Staff Sergeant Hodgson heard what he heard and deducted what he heard. I believe he did. I do believe he did. I have no reason to question him. I didn't at the time. But again, that's when Captain Reamer had contacted the local police.
And whether that was by phone or in person or by text, it didn't matter. You would take the,
He's one of my soldiers, sir. If he tells me, if I have no, I personally don't know Staff Sergeant Hodgson well. I don't know. I have no reason to question his integrity.
okay, let me just finish up with this,
Sir.
report of mental status evaluation. So the recommendations are that the service member's chain of command stay engaged with the service member's care.
Yes,
And
sir.
that didn't happen, did it? From
Captain
everything you-
Reamer attempted, yes. You're
He
correct.
attempted.
After the attempts were made, you're correct.
Okay,
And Captain Reamer had spoken to or was in some kind of contact with his case manager.
but in terms of the chain of command, the chain of command didn't contact Robert Card, rather they relied on Hodgson to do it, right?
After a negative attempt, yes, sir. After negative results, yes, sir.
And then
After negative results,
the next one is that once discharged to HOR, be followed up with case management brigade medical officer. Also command and RMO initiate MEB process. Was that done?
I don't know who they spoke to at the brigade medical office. I don't know.
It is also recommended that measures be taken to safely remove all firearms and weapons from service members' HOR.
That was done, sir. He didn't, if he would have come to drill, he would not have had access to weapons at the reserve center. In October, we had a weapons qualification at Fort Dix, New Jersey. We all went down there as a battalion, and he was not there. If he had been there, he would not have had access to weapons.
He wouldn't have had access to weapons at the reserve center, right?
No, sir. We don't. Generally speaking, the only time the weapons come out is if they're cleaning them or they're inventorying them, and they don't really. The way that vault works is very few people, to include myself, that can go in there.
But there's no effort that you know of and can point to get those firearms that Card had at his home out of the house, other than to rely on his family to try to do their best to do that, right?
And First Sergeant Moat sending a letter to the county. Yes, I thought the letter was a pretty good definitive explanation. What the county does with it after that, I don't know.
So in terms of housing the guns at the reserve center in Saco, you understand now that that would have been impossible?
Would have been very, very difficult to do. Yes.
And so
Impossible. I would,
Go
under
ahead.
the current, on the opinion that I was given, the answer would have been no, under the current, on how it's written now, how that is written to me.
So when Captain Reamer wrote on November 8th that it was determined that it was not necessary to offer to have him voluntarily secure his weapons at the Saco Reserve Center, it's your testimony that it would have been impossible to have Card secure the weapons at the Reserve Center?
Without certain permissions, it would have been impossible. I would have been in violation if I would have done that without permissions. Yes.
So Captain Reamer was wrong about that. Do you know where he came to that belief?
Captain Reamer, maybe he didn't understand it. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he had seen it done at other units in different districts. I don't know. On active duty, it's a common thing. I know that people can store sometimes their weapons in a vault on active duty because they're transferring somewhere. There's different ways to deal with it. It's different everywhere you go within the Department of Defense. So I only know what's local to me right now. And from what I was told and what I see is that First Sergeant Moat did make an attempt to get instill the yellow flag, get the yellow flag stuff, and that Staff Sergeant Hodgson had tried to work something with the family like that. And I think the only way that we could have ensured that is if there was a search warrant done of his premises, that all the weapons were turned over.
Okay. And in the sentence before that, Captain Reamer says that a plan was already developed and implemented. That Sergeant Carr's personally owned weapons were to be removed and secured by Sergeant Carr's family. How was it implemented? Do you know?
You'd have to ask him. From what I understand, that Hodgson had worked it out.
Okay. So,
Toby,
Toby.
they're doing an interviewer switch. I mean, an interpreter switch, sorry.
Okay.
You're good to go, Toby.
okay, thank you. Let's look at Exhibit 20.
Okay, give me 1 second. What is it, sir? It's just I've got them all over the place.
That's an email from Patrick Dean to you and others.
I got it. I'm not on. Yeah, I got it, sir. Yeah, I got it. I'm on that page.
In the last paragraph, there's a series of questions and answers in this email, correct?
Yes, sir. Starting with what was the BA last attended, correct?
Right. And the last paragraph is what efforts were made to contact following missing initial BA. Do you know who wrote that question?
You'd have to ask Master Sergeant Dean. I believe you'd have to ask him. We were asked a lot of different questions by different people, and we were putting together answers.
And do you know who was providing the answers, or was it a group effort?
It's a group effort.
Okay.
Dean was kind of orchestrating a response. I don't want to say orchestrating, that sounds nefarious. He was putting together our responses by gathering information. I think I described it earlier. It's almost like a term paper.
So the question is asked about what efforts were made to make contact following the September incident, missing the battle assembly. It says he corresponded best with emails, personal email. Hodgson was most effective in communicating. He avoided contact with others, specifically leaders. Did Captain Reamer seek your advice about how to contact and start communication directly with a subordinate who is not responding?
No, he didn't, because a lot of this, what you're seeing there is very, very routine. You'll have soldiers who have challenges going on in their world. Maybe they're not wanting to go to battle assembly. Maybe they're having some kind of problem. Maybe they moved. Maybe they're indisposed of at the time. And this is a very standard question that's asked by the Army Reserve component when soldiers don't show up. Is what correspondence do you have with them? What's the best way to contact with them? Who's the most effective member? Or sometimes we have to call soldiers mothers, their girlfriend, boyfriend. That's a standard question answer. Question answer. Excuse me, sir.
Is it, there are those who say that the Army Reserve just didn't really want him hanging around. He was a problem, and they were just as happy not to have him there in September and October. Is any truth to that, to your knowledge?
If someone said that, I don't think they're in my unit. I don't know without them saying it in front of me. I am of the belief all soldiers that aren't showing up, we should try to recycle them. We should try to get them back. I need those soldiers. I have a lot of important missions. Robert Card was an important person in our unit. He had a lot of talents and skills despite what he did. And I don't subscribe to that. So anyone that says that, I don't know who they are. But that they're in my unit, I'd like to know who they are.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you respond to those who say that in July and September, when he was threatening reservists, the reserve acted quickly and decisively, but after September 15th, and that immediate threat had passed, they didn't seem as eager to help and downplayed the threat that he posed.
I don't know anyone that downplayed the threat that he posed. Anyone who would say that would probably have to say something very similar to the police that went to his house, knocked on his door, didn't get an answer, and left, and the police that received a report from First Sergeant Moat. I don't understand why people think that this is like an active duty post. It's not.
I understand that, but when deputy sheriffs are told to take what Hodgson says with a grain of salt and things like that, don't you think that's downplaying the threat?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Okay, but you don't have an opinion?
No.
So in retrospect, what could the reserve have done better that it didn't do?
Wait, you came in broke. Could you repeat that, sir?
Sure. In retrospect, what could the reserve do that it didn't do to stop the threat that he posed?
Sir, if you want to ask me about a fact, I'll answer a fact. I don't want to speculate.
Okay, but as the commanding officer of this unit, you must have thought about things that could have been done differently.
Obviously, sir.
And what do you think? What should we take from your thoughts?
Well, I think, and I don't want to give an opinion, but I'll give you this because you seem sincere. Honestly, I think that mental health is a national issue. It's very complicated. There's a lot of layers to it, and people need to understand it better. Everybody, we need to take it. We need to fund it better. And also appreciate the limitations I have as a part-time commander in the reserves as far as my authorities go and do not go.
Are you aware of any changes in policies or procedures in the reserves or active duty Army since October relating to this?
I can only speak within locally in my own command. We are I don't want to say more serious about mental health because it affected my unit deeply. But my unit, we have counselors there every weekend now that I've implemented from the Veterans Affairs, from different organizations to kind of talk to some of the soldiers that were affected by this. Because on a spectrum, some of these people didn't know Robert Card all the way to some were friends with him for years. So they're affected. So locally, I can speak to that. I know my division commander is really trying to work her best to figure out exactly what you just said, the best answer for that, and how she can implement it at her level, at a very high level. After that, I really don't know, sir. I just know my unit, I have counselors there, whether they need them or not, and the counselors have helped out quite a bit with some of the people I have in my formation that do have scars, mental scars.
Thank you. I don't mean to monopolize this any longer. Thank you very much.
No, it's fine. Thank you, sir.
I'll turn it back to you.
Count on me to talk when I'm muted, invariably. But good morning, Lieutenant Colonel Vazquez. I just have a few
Morning.
questions.
Sure.
And I want to start by saying I think we all appreciate, we've come to appreciate the what authority a part-time reserve commander and commanders have with respect to their subordinates. And we understand that that is more limited, certainly much more limited than is available for active duty soldiers. So I want to kind of preface this by saying that. But I want to get back to the whole issue of Mr. Card's treatment compliance post hospitalization up in New York. So I'm correct in understanding that you were aware that he essentially was kind of incommunicado and essentially non-compliant with any post-hospitalization treatment. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so do you, in your opinion, is there any value in both knowing whether a soldier is compliant or not compliant and then finding out that they're not compliant? Is there value in that knowledge? Is there some understanding that can be derived from knowing that a soldier is not compliant with recommended treatment? A soldier who was involuntarily hospitalized, deemed dangerous to himself and others, as a result of that as a consequence of that hospitalization, is there some value in understanding that someone is non-compliant? I mean, what does that tell you?
If someone is not compliant with their treatment,
Correct.
on any type of medical issue, it could be a spectrum of things, from they feel they don't have a problem to they're antisocial, they don't want to talk, they're obfuscating. That on a spectrum, it could be quite a bit.
So would you agree that it would be important to know that someone is non-compliant?
It's important.
Okay, so and so the command structure was aware that Mr. Card was non-compliant with treatment post-hospitalization. You later came to understand that he made threats to the unit, correct?
After the treatment, ma'am?
Yes.
Yes.
And you later came to understand that he had assaulted Sergeant Hodgson?
I heard about that in February of 24, or way after.
Okay. So
I did not know anything about Sergeant Card until the summer. Anything that happened prior to that, I didn't know. Again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. My predecessor didn't know anything about it, didn't make it to our level.
Okay, but you were aware that he had made threats against the unit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Via the text, yes.
Via the text from Sergeant Hodgson?
Yes, and I also know that Captain Reamer spoke to him and he denied it, or he downplayed it. So
who downplayed it? I'm sorry.
Card. I believe Captain Reamer spoke to him when he's talking about his retirement, and I believe Card downplayed it. can ask Captain Reamer, but it was something along those lines.
So was there any decision making that was undertaken knowing that he was making threats against the unit, potentially despite any downplaying that Mr. Card might have done, and that he was non-compliant with treatment, that he had been a danger to himself and others, you know, resulting in his hospitalization? Was there any discussion about, you know, do we just, you know, what do we do as a commanders in this unit to deal with Mr. Card?
There was no discussion. There was just action. Again, First Sergeant Moat wrote a probable cause statement on his condition, and Captain Reamer contacted the local police.
Okay.
So there wasn't a discussion about it because from where I stand, it looks like all the levers are pulled that can be pulled. I don't have any police that work in his county that, you know, that I don't know any cops there. I don't know any of the police. Moat apparently had a connection and he utilized it. Moat can't force them to do anything.
Yeah.
The people that went to his house, my guys notified him. So there wasn't any real discussion. There was discussion after the fact when they told me what they did. They, you know, that, okay, Moat reached out to the police. This is what happened. And that Captain Reamer had contacted the local police.
And there was no, and back to Toby Dilworth's question, there was no contemplation of trying to compel Mr. Card to come to a battle assembly.
There was. That's why Captain Reamer spoke to him and said, hey, what's going on? Are you coming to battle? He said, no, I'm not coming in October. That's what he told Captain Reamer. So in that conversation, Captain Reamer was gauging whether he was going to come and trying to get him. He was just trying to open the door with somebody who we know with 2020 hindsight was having serious mental challenges at that time.
Is it fair to say that you knew at that time that he was having fairly serious mental challenges?
No, not to the
fair.
extent that we know now. Not to the extent we know now. No, didn't know that.
Right. Were you aware that looking back on it, are you aware of anyone in your command structure who knew that he had assaulted Sergeant Hodgson prior to October?
You'd have to ask Sergeant Hodgson who we told. I don't know who knew prior to that. Again,
you haven't learned
the first time
okay.
I learned subsequently about it, and I'm not trying to downplay that action, but if two soldiers get into an argument, you know, at a subway or something like that, or they get in a little tussle, it might not make it to the commanders or the senior non-commissioned officers. Sometimes sometimes they keep it at the lowest level. I don't know, but if it doesn't come to me, I can't action it.
No, I understand that. It was my impression that someone in the command structure, I know you didn't know, but someone in the command structure knew that he had assaulted Sergeant Hodgson.
Yeah, you'd have to ask Hodgson who he told.
Okay. So, is it fair to say that there may be, in hindsight, looking back, there's sort of three considerations to deal with the risk posed by Robert Card? One is, as Toby talked about, requiring him to come to battle assembly so they could contemplate another assessment of his mental status and perhaps do a command-directed evaluation order. That might be one response. A second response might be, as Captain Reamer did, which was to notify local law enforcement regarding a welfare check. Was there any contemplation of pressing any kind of charges, given that your reserve unit was threatened by Mr. Card?
No, there was not. Because it would have been hearsay. I didn't hear it. I don't doubt Mr. Hodgson, but I didn't hear it. We contacted the local police the way we should have.
We're going to switch interpreters.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay. So we're all set? Okay,
Yeah.
so let's look at the last option, which is the request by Captain Reamer to Saginaw County to do a welfare check. I just want to revisit what is confusing to me, which is I know that Moat, sorry, is it Sergeant? I'm sorry. I guess
First sergeant.
First
You can call him
sergeant.
Mr. Moat, Kelvin.
Yeah.
He's a great guy.
I did read his lengthy statement narrative. I think that was very inclusive, very representative of the threat posed by Mr. Card. I think it arguably, to anyone reading that, would have set off a lot of alarm bells, which is, I think, his point in sending that to local law enforcement. So you have that, and then you have the conversation between Sergeant Schofield and Captain Reamer, which had a very, to me, a very different tenor, which was, you know, can you just make sure he's breathing? You know, maybe give him some time to cool off. Hodgson's, you get taken with a grain of salt, not our most reliable reservist, something along those lines. Can you understand, I guess my question is, can you understand why someone might be confused about the different emphases between Reamer and Moat?
I can see where someone would have some challenges with that and try and understand it totally. But when you compound that text with what Moat sent a draft copy of, I'm not sure what else we could have done as a unit. Did Captain Reamer articulate the threat the way someone could interpret it better? Maybe not. I don't know. I wasn't there. But I can tell you, when you compound with what Captain Reamer is saying, a police officer in the state of New Hampshire, and you have Kelvin Moat, who's been a police officer for 20-something years, writing you a letter like that, I don't know what else. I'm not sure what else you can deduct from that.
I hear you. So, but can you agree that the tone was different? Reamer's tone was different than Moat's tone.
That's true, but that's Captain Reamer's style. That's how he speaks. That's how he is. I can't coach him on how to speak.
No, that's
or
fine.
whatever.
That's
but
fine. I just wanted to emphasize that could have been someone who didn't know Captain Reamer well. Doesn't, you know, I don't think Sergeant Schofield and Captain Reamer were, you know, known to one another prior to this incident, that there may have been some confusion. But anyway, that notwithstanding, I have just one more question. Did I understand you to say to Jeff Rushlaw that you, an Army sort of after action report or something along those lines was released to you?
Yeah. They gave me a draft report on a couple findings.
They gave you a draft report. Okay. And do you know if that report has been released?
No, it hasn't. You would have it by now, probably.
Okay. Thank you. I'm done.
That's my, yep. No problem.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Paula, would you like to go?
You want me to go ahead of Ann?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Lieutenant Colonel, what is your civilian job?
I work for Homeland Security.
In what capacity?
I work for Homeland Security Investigations.
Okay. And I, as Dr. Bader said, I think we all have come to have a very acute appreciation of the lack of authority that command structure has over the reservists in question and generally. But for clarification purposes, if a reservist shows up for a battle assembly and a command directed evaluation is ordered at that time, and the reservist says, I don't want to go, there's nothing that the command can do to enforce that order?
Well, I'm not here. I'm not here to speculate. If something like that happened, I would call my higher command, and they would probably ask me to call the local police, and we would try to have the local police do some kind of health evaluation, as would anyone at a shopping mall with someone having a mental breakdown. You would call the police, and or anywhere in public, call the police, and the police can bring people and get them evaluated. It's very, I don't have armed guards there. I don't have people with handcuffs there. We're not in the reserve component. Often we're in remote areas that aren't, are, I don't want to say bare minimum facilities, but they're facilities there for us to do our job and move out smartly on it. So we don't have a lot of, it would be very difficult to do what you're saying without calling the police.
And would the local police, is it your understanding that the local police would have authority to make an arrest of that reservist based on his or her refusal to comply with a lawful command directive? Or would they have to make it?
No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't be. They would not. I'm not a legal person. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think I can force a police officer to arrest somebody for some kind of mental breakdown. I could probably request that they put him in protective custody. I could probably request that maybe they give him a mental evaluation, but if he doesn't do anything violent or anything illegal within the facility, there's not much I can do.
All right. And I think you've testified that Four Winds, in your view, failed to comply with their obligation to make sure the command is fully informed of the status of their reservist hospitalization. Did I understand your testimony correctly?
Yes. Yes.
Were there any efforts, to your knowledge, made to contact Four Winds and become more fully informed?
You'd have to ask Captain Reamer. I believe he was in touch with them. You'd have to ask him that, but I believe he was in touch with them.
And is it your testimony today, Lieutenant Colonel, that everything that your unit could have done, given the limitations of your authority in these matters, that everything that could have been done by your unit was done with respect to Sergeant Card?
Yes, and some. I don't know if I had a unit, and I'll give you a example. If I had a unit that had a first sergeant like Moat that worked as a car part salesman at a Toyota dealer, he would not have the inkling to write a probable cause statement to get that guy's weapons pulled. If I didn't have police up at West Point in the summer that are seasoned, that have many years of experience like we had, and they saw the mental breakdown of Card going on in front of them, and they weren't trained the way our guys were trained and had that experience in the law enforcement field, I really don't know. I don't know a lot of average reserve units that would have handled that better than we did, considering we had the people we had there at the time. A lot of these reserve units are not all police. You could have someone that maybe it's a stay-at-home father, stay-at-home mother. They don't have that type of experience like my guys had, or the knowledge to write a probable cause statement to the state to say these weapons need to be pulled.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dan,
Oh, okay.
to go.
Lieutenant Colonel, I have a few questions.
Yes, sir.
The local police were unable to see Mr. Card, the Saginaw Sheriff's Office, and thereafter, no other police officer was able to make contact with him if they were trying. So when Captain Reamer spoke to Mr. Card about whether he was going to attend the battle assembly,
Yeah.
I noticed that he did not point out when Mr. Card said, "No, I'm not coming," he didn't say, "Well, that won't be an excused absence," nor did he say, "You really should come," nor did he object to the absence. Is that correct?
I didn't hear I didn't hear the conversation. I just know that they had a conversation talking about retirement, and I believe Captain Reamer asked him if he made some threats, and he denied it.
Yeah.
And he said he wasn't coming, and that he was kind of angry.
My memory
That's
is
what
that Captain Reamer said, "Okay," and it's not a surprise to me because they had contacted the Saco police and said, "This guy's coming down and he's threatened to shoot someone, and we think that it may very well be one of our people, and so we want you there." So I'm not at all surprised that he wasn't insistent upon it, but that would have been an opportunity for police to lay eyes on Mr. Card and to observe his condition and to determine whether or not he could be held in protective custody and taken to a main facility. And it would have been the Saco police who would have been charged with that if he had shown up. So it seemed to me that, do you disagree with that speculation on my part of what might have happened if in fact he had appeared at the battle assembly?
Sir, if that's your opinion, I'm not going to argue with you. I really don't want to speculate on what could have happened. I think we're dealing with a person who had a lot of mental challenges going on at that time, and he was deteriorating. So for me to predict what he would have done, how he would have done it, I'm way out of my league.
Well, I wasn't asking you to predict. I was just trying to sort of establish that this would have been an opportunity for police to lay eyes on Mr. Card.
Okay.
Which is what is totally missing in this scenario. And similarly, with regard to the record of non-compliance of Mr. Card with the aftercare provided by the Army Reserve, was any of that non-compliance forwarded or made known to the Saginaw Sheriff's Office, who were the police officers who had been contacted by the reserve?
You'd have to ask them. I don't know. Not that I know of.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Sir.
Would you like to go?
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel. I have one more question.
Sure,
After his discharge from Four Winds, was Sergeant Card considered fit for duty?
He had what's called a medical profile, which means that he had some limitations. And I think I talked about it earlier on the medical profile. It said he was a low threat, keep him away from essentially weapons because of the medication he's on. So he wasn't fit for total duty at that time. He hadn't been through a medical evaluation board yet. At that point, once you go through the board process, someone at a much different level than me determines that. He had limitations, though, when he got out.
And who convenes the medical board process?
The Army Reserve component.
And was that
it would come from me? I don't think it was. And when I looked at the Department of Defense instruction, they were supposed to start processing his medical board when he was discharged. According to the Department of Defense instruction I have, it says look at MEB process, and that was not done. They gave him what's called a profile, which is like limited duty,
And
that said he was a low threat.
I'm afraid I was talking over you, so I didn't understand
Oh,
who
sorry,
you
sorry,
said
sorry.
had the responsibility to convene the medical board process.
The reserve component has that. It would originate in the unit. He would go to a doctor. The doctor would say, consider him for a medical evaluation board. They'd get some opinions from different providers. The paperwork would go up, and eventually, if he was found to be unfit for duty, they would board him out of the Army or medically retire him.
But what position within the unit was responsible for initiating that process?
That would have started with us at the battalion level. That's where that would have started. A medical evaluation board would have started with us.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at, Lieutenant Colonel, is what person? Would it Captain Reamer? Would it be you? Who within
ultimately it would be me, but ultimately a doctor would have to come to me and say he needs to be medically boarded, and that didn't happen. Or you consider him for a medical evaluation board.
But you had the I'm sorry, I'm losing the discharge evaluation that said that the MEP, the medical board process, should be convened.
Correct? Right. But they didn't. That was never communicated to us, though, other than what was there. So.
Well, when you say it was never communicated to us, it was communicated to Captain Reamer. Is that right?
They should have sent something officially to say medical board and at least start the paperwork. I can read the regulation, what it says on that they're supposed to start initiating that.
And who is they?
The medical healthcare provider.
So
it says referral to the service member's case to the services physical evaluation board.
So Four Winds, a civilian hospital, was responsible for sending that to the unit to begin the medical board process?
I'm not totally familiar with the process. It should have went through West Point. West Point contracted with them.
So it was West Point's responsibility?
The facility, I believe they should have contacted, they should have initiated, according to the DoD the Department of Defense instruction I have. If they wanted to medically board him, they could have started it.
They being Four Winds?
Four Winds via West Point.
Okay. And you spoke earlier about the level of experience of the members of the unit you took over last summer. Did you consider Commander Captain Reamer one of the experienced members of that unit?
No, he had about 10 years in the Army.
So he
had good experience, don't get me wrong. He had been a commander for a few years, but not compared to, I've got some guys in there 40 years.
All right, but you did consider him an experienced commander?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. I do think that's all.
Okay, no problem, ma'am.
Go ahead, Ann, you're on.
Yeah, Ann, you can unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. I know this has been kind of a long morning. I have just some clarification follow-up questions for you, please. During his direct testimony, Captain Reamer said that he didn't see some of the various documents and notices about taking away the weapons and that sort of thing because his emails were down. Were you aware his emails were down?
Not until after the shooting.
Not until after the shooting? Okay. Do you have any knowledge or information about how long his emails were down for between the July West Point incident and the day of the shooting?
No, I don't, ma'am. You'd have to ask him.
Okay. You've also testified that there was a formal Army Reserve internal report. Is there a specific name to this report or an Army document number to this kind of report?
You'd have to talk to the Army litigation team.
Okay. And then you said there was also a May 2024 memo that came to you about the storage of guns at the
Yes,
Army Reserve.
I can send that to you.
Okay,
It's an email. It's more of an email from the regional director's force protection officer that deals with all that. I can send that to you.
thank you. That would be very helpful. Was there a previous version of those regulations that was in effect between July and October of 2023?
I imagine.
All right, and would you be willing to send that to us if you get the necessary Army clearance?
Let me clarify. It's an internal email that just kind of goes over the questions asked about this specific case, like storing weapons, and there's an explanation from the expert on it.
Okay. Now, you also said that, and I'm just going to refer to him as Moat, because that's what he asked us to refer to him during the hearings.
You need an interpreter switch, Ann.
Oops.
Thank you.
All set? Okay. You also has testified quite a bit about Moat telling you about his statement in the statement of probable cause to initiate the yellow flag law. When did Moat tell you it was his intent to initiate the yellow flag law?
He didn't tell me. I never spoke to Moat about it until after. He didn't tell me. He told Reamer. He talked to Reamer about it. Reamer briefed it to me. You'd have to ask. You'd have to ask Moat.
Okay, so but Reamer was briefed about it prior to the shooting. Is that correct? Is that what Reamer told you?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. And you did not see the statement until after the shooting. Am I understanding?
Correct. Correct.
Do you know, or did Reamer tell you whether he communicated that information prior to the shooting to the local sheriff's department?
You'd have to ask Captain Reamer.
Okay. There has been an ongoing Army administrative investigation going on. Have you been informed of when that report is going to be released?
No, I don't know. And it's not really an Army investigation. It's an Army Reserve investigation. So it covers the reserve component. So you'd have to ask Army litigation division.
Litigation, that question. Okay. Do you know how many members of your unit, of the Army Reserve unit, were interviewed by the Army Reserve investigators?
No, I don't.
You also talked about Jason Rogers, who was the suicide and mental health coordinator,
Yep.
prevention person.
Yep.
If someone, would Mr. Rogers take calls from concerned family members and provide advice to them?
You'd have to ask him. I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
Okay. And
what his parameters are.
Okay. Where is Mr. Rogers based? Is he at the Saco office?
No, he's in Washington State.
Washington State.
Yep. As if this couldn't get more confusing for you.
And he's a civilian contractor?
He's not a contractor. He's a government employee.
He's a government employee. Okay. Is he an Army employee? Or
Yes,
just
he
a
is.
U.S.
Yes,
government
he is.
employee?
He's
an
a Department of the Army civilian.
Okay. He's a Department of the Army civilian employee. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, got that down. Did you ever have any conversations with Captain Reamer about whether he should probably just try to talk to Card about voluntarily turning his guns over outside of his family for storage?
No. No. Because I believe that Reamer was under the impression that that had been taken care of.
Okay.
Based on his conversation with Staff Sergeant Hodgson.
Do you know if Captain Reamer ever followed up with with law enforcement in Maine to verify that this had occurred?
You'd have to ask him. I don't know.
Were you made aware that a member of the Army Reserve Unit, I believe it was Uric, was contacted in May by Deputy Carlton and informed of the problems and asked for the Army Reserve's assistance?
I heard about that, I think recently, within February, I heard that, or October.
So it was after the shooting you heard about that?
Yes.
Did either you or Reamer or Moat, if you know, ever contact his family to verify that they have been successful in removing the weapons?
No, not that I know of. You'd have to ask Reamer or Moat.
And then finally, you said that you believe that Captain Reamer had spoken to Card about we're going to call it the Hodgson assault, that led to the whole texts and everything going on in September, and that Card downplayed the threats.
No. If you misunderstood me, I don't know if Reamer spoke to him about the assault when it was discussed. I don't know anything about that.
You don't? Okay.
No, I don't. No, I don't. I didn't know about that until after the shooting. And like I said, my predecessor, McKinley Wood, didn't know anything about that assault either. I asked him on February 9, 2024, I asked him, I said, did you know about this? And he said, I had no idea. I would have told you. He was more focused on Staff Sergeant Hodgson, he opined to me.
Okay. And finally, under the Army regulations that deal with the command-directed mental health evaluations, are you aware of the HIPAA exceptions that allow the Army to get information? And so the Army, in order to protect the troops and to ensure that a soldier is in the right place to perform their duties, is allowed to have otherwise protected HIPAA information under that Army Reserve exception, correct?
Correct. But I would also say that under the regulation, it also states that the medical health provider will recommend appropriate precautions to the commander or supervisor. Admission of the service member to an inpatient psychiatric or medical unit for evaluation and treatment. There's a lot there that I did not. When I've done, I'll put it this way: when I've done these mental health evaluations in the past, or I've seen them, you get very specific directions. And if Captain Reamer isn't answering his emails, or there's someone that's not corresponding, and there's a threat or a problem, generally 90% of the time, they will reach out to someone else within the unit or someone, because again, communication errors happen. But if there's a threat, they're obliged to communicate that. So saying that I sent an email and nobody responded is kind of disingenuous within the instruction that the DoD provides.
And in this instance, prior to October 25th, no one from Keller Army Hospital or Four Winds reached out to you?
No, or anyone in my chain of command above me.
Right. Okay, I have nothing further. Thank you.
Does that conclude the questioning?
I had some more, Sheriff, briefly.
Yeah, that's Jeff. Go ahead.
So just going back over September 15th, I know you were not in the line of communication with everything that was happening that day, but you learned earlier that day that there'd been this text which sounded threatening and which alarmed First Sergeant Moat. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And as part of that alarm, the intention was to notify the Saco Police Department so that they would be in a position to protect the unit if Mr. Card appeared.
Yes, sir.
But did you find out later on that between Captain Reamer and First Sergeant Moat, that never happened? Saco Police?
No, I didn't. No, I saw the police that morning parked outside a street adjacent to the Reserve Center.
And
I did see them parked there.
That was a consequence of Master Sergeant Urich calling Saco PD in the middle of the night after he saw the File 6 put out by Saginaw County. And so somehow or other, Captain Reamer and First Sergeant Moat had never notified Saco PD. Did you know that?
No, I treat them, I figured they did it as a team. I was told that they were notified. Who did what, how it was delegated. I didn't get that far into the details, but I know when I arrived at, whatever, dark 30, whatever time I arrived at, I saw a police car there, and I knew what it was about.
Correct. And in the meantime, sometime I think in the afternoon of the Friday the 15th, Captain Reamer had spoken to Robert Card, who told him he wasn't coming to battle assembly. And
Correct.
does it occur to you that in Captain Reamer's mind at that point, the crisis had been diffused?
You'd have to ask Captain Reamer. It doesn't, based on what happened on Saturday, where the police were there from where I sit, I don't know how it happened, but the police showed up at our unit. The details of how they were notified, you just told me.
All right, so you never learned that in any kind of the after the crisis discussion about what the Army had done or not done?
When Reamer briefed me on it, he said the police were notified. He went through the steps that had been taken. He didn't say who did it.
All right. Now, Master Sergeant Urich is a very senior member of the unit.
Most senior, I think.
And did you ever learn that, and this is based on what he told us, I think in an earlier hearing, that he had been communicating with Robert Card's brother, Ryan, about Robert's condition. Did you know that?
I had heard something about it. I didn't get confirmation of it.
And Master Sergeant Urich is not only very senior, but he's also, I guess you might say, a genuine war hero. Okay. Did you know that?
I know his military status.
He was an Army Ranger at the Battle of Mogadishu, Somalia in 1993, and was actually featured in the Black Hawk Down movie.
Correct.
So, and did you ever hear that Robert Card's brother Ryan, who's also a 100% disabled military veteran, had been an Army Ranger? Did you ever know that?
I did know. I knew he was a veteran.
So this is all a preamble to asking the question: wouldn't have Sergeant Urich been the ideal person to reach out to Ryan Card and find out if the guns have been secured?
You're asking me to opine on something that it's just, I don't want to speculate on that.
All right, thank you.
Nothing further? If not, Lieutenant Colonel, we thank you for your appearance today and for your effort in answering the questions that have been put to you. We appreciate your presence. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And seconded? Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously, and we will stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.